everybody. Welcome back to the GC podcast, where we explore the future of work, connection, and community. I'm your host, Liz Elam, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, I'm joined by Koral Ibrahim, the founder of Ready House, a creative consultancy and community that helps brands build connections from the inside out. Koral is a strategist, keynote speaker, published author whose work lives at the intersection of brand, culture, and belonging. You may have had the absolute pleasure of listening us on the stage doing a fireside chat at the last GCUK in London, which was one of the most talked about moments of the event. Today, we're continuing the conversation and going deeper into what community really means, how events bring it to life, and what the future of work might hold. So welcome, Koral. How the hell are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Liz. Yeah, I'm doing good. The weather in London is looking gloomy. We're raining, but always feeling optimistic with all the things that we're working on. So thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, I won't tell you about how absolutely beautiful and sunny it is, as per usual in Austin, Texas.
Oh, God. You kill me every time.
I know. Okay, well, let's start with something personal. I believe that my morning routine is part of what makes me successful. Like today, I got up an hour and a half early and literally read things, meditated, got myself ready for the day, had a little talk with my higher power, and then I was ready to go. What does your morning routine look like?
I must admit, it's gone through a few iterations recently. Pre-baby, it was all around starting the day very simply with a workout. I used to train 6 times a week.
Wow.
It gets my head in the game and up before anyone else. So often at the crack of dawn, and going to the gym, clearing my head, always a cold shower. That was my kind of secret weapon to my pre-caffeine, my first coffee of the day. And then, it kind of gave me absolute clarity and continued, I'd say, routine that I think just sets me up, consistency. And then post baby, I must admit, obviously I'm 3 months in. So it's all still very
this
new.
Is new.
Yeah, it is very new, but I'm still doing that 4 times a week. So I think
good.
Me and my wife both say that we've got to be a little bit selfish at times, and that's our therapy, which is going away. And mine is in the morning, so I get up again before the baby, before my wife, and get to the gym, and then go to work. And then I've still managed to instill some kind of routine. But then on the other 2 days of where I'm not and where I haven't been going to the gym, it's about just being wholesome with the family, and I can finally say that, which is being with the little one and having some morning time before the busyness starts.
I love it. That's a great way to ground yourself. So you've been making a name for yourself by connecting community and a brand in a way that feels really human and real. What first drew you into this kind of work?
Well, I must admit, it definitely wasn't that articulate as I started the business. To give some context, my background's in agencies. So I used to work at advertising agencies, branding agencies, and I fell in love with the power of brand. And I must admit, at that tender age that I was when I started the business, it was incredibly naive. I started through a simple provocation of I loved brands, but I thought they were underserving themselves by how they brought their businesses to life through social media content. And I got infatuated by this idea that there's a difference between a customer and a champion. And what is the role of a champion? And that's historically always been our line. And what does championship mean? And it means not necessarily focusing on product, not using social media as a pinboard of where you just focus on your sales messaging. And brands were getting kind of incredibly confused around the role that their content played on certain platforms. And throughout that journey, I'd say probably for the first 3 years, it was that blindsided. It was kind of head first. I had a level of conversation with brand owners, marketing teams that was so exciting. And I quickly realized, oh shit, this is I've not only won the work, I've actually got to do the work as well. So because of the actual kind of pivot of social media, that literally meant taking content, writing captions, thinking strategically around the brand. But practically, I felt like it wasn't necessarily the right level of work for the impact and level of conversation that I was having up top with the owners.
Yeah.
So about 4 years ago, we did a bit of a pivot. to understand that actually the work that we've done on social media is super important, but it meant that we should be thinking about content in a more evergreen way. Content could be something physical, content can be something digital, of course, but it's about the interplay and the way that the customer community member is being taken through these different paradigms of a brand. And I wanted to create a business that thought like a branding agency, but instead of a typical kind of rollout or output, which would be business cards, identity, logo, we actually started interrogating behavior all through the lens of content, with the main idea of how we build community. Now, I hate community as a word. We'll come on to that probably a bit later on today. I think community is a massively overused buzzword, but it has such a valuable proposition for a business. And most of our work now is around how we are reframing the value of community for a brand and what it actually means to build it. So yeah, a very long-winded way of answering our question, but it's been a journey. And I think only in the last 4 years have we really articulated who we are for, what we do, and how we bring it to life, which I feel has a unique kind of approach.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's dig right into why do you hate the word community? And I get that it's overused, but like I personally, and I'm a big like nomenclature nerd, I am good with community. I'm also good with belonging. I feel like those two are a little interchangeable. Community and co-working is maybe overused a little bit, but I think, the thing is what we're trying to do is build connections in between some human beings that make them feel seen, because then they don't feel lonely and disconnected. And it's the spaces that can put community over capitalism, which has been a real theme that's been coming up for me lately, that work and they just work. It's the ones that just are like, oh, here's a desk and some coffee. And then they're like, why doesn't this work? It's because they have no community. But also community is super hard, in particular for the real estate folks, because you can't buy it and you have to build it. And they have no idea how to do that.
Totally. Okay, so I guess the starting point for me is that, and the reason I hate it as a word is because everyone is boasting that they've got a community. Or a brand has built up a really great community. And fundamentally, I think there is a difference between an audience member, a customer, a visitor, a follower, and a community member. They all have a different label for a type of interaction that a customer has or a visitor has with a brand. And the core crux of it is that there's a difference between a customer and a community member. And a brand, ironically, can have 1,000 customers, can have thousands of them, but that doesn't necessarily mean they've got any community members. And I think this is where I'm treading the line between a brand with a utilitarian service that sells something compelling, but an emotional reason to engage with the brand and why you are going to join them. Again, buy brand, join brand, as we touched upon in the conference. So there is a more deeper role that a brand then plays. And that means, I think, seeing the brand as a person. And in the community co-working space, as an example, if a sorry, let me rephrase that, pause. In the co-working space, as an example, thinking about their brand and as a person, I would say, if this brand was a person, what values would it have? What would it stand for? What side of the fence is it on? To give it a moral compass as a brand, to understand what the North Star is that they are being led by. And that can have an impact on so many different things, from the staff members that they have to how they design their space to the type of interactions people want in that space or with that brand. But fundamentally, back to that community piece, who do we actually want to join us? Because it suddenly gives us a moral compass of the people that we do want to join us and people that aren't for us. There's a fantastic framework called the Primal Branding Framework. And for me, if you are a primal brand, then there are 7 key principles of what it means to really kind of understand your role in the world. And that and I won't go through all 7 at the moment, but it includes, who are the pagans for our brand? What is the lexicon of words that we use specifically? But also, who are the people who are going to literally tattoo the brand name or the brand logo on our chest? And it's about kind of that myriad of thinking of a brand that I think we lack, just generally speaking, commercially, because to your point, the people who often control the purse strings, either the accounting department or landlords and commercial and operators, they don't necessarily see the value in what that brings because they think it is a nice to have. But fundamentally, it can change the trajectory of a business because it can, you know, the typical metrics are around loyalty, retention, repeat purchase. But effectively, it's around, also the fact that you've got a captive community that you can bring around with you as you scale. What does that look like of actually leaning on them for advice? And when you kind of elevate them to a C-suite executive type level of where you can kind of start brainstorming with your community, that's how powerful it can be. And it can really then create brands that are for their customer, not just selling them something to interact with.
Yeah, I'm amazed. A lot of people through in Juicy membership or in calls or whatever are like, my events really aren't resonating. What should I do? What event should I do next? And I'm like, just ask your community. That's all you have to do. Ask them what they want, and then give them that.
There's a massive amount of answers in that, right? On the very simplistic standpoint, there's a massive amount of answers of just simply asking a question.
Yeah. Yeah. And people want to participate. They want to help. They want to have input. But if you're not asking them, they aren't going to probably come up and give it to you. Some will, but most won't.
I think the co-working space in general can learn a lot from, and I'm not saying co-working space, we work in the co-working space, right? So this is not derogatory, but they can learn a lot from some of the sexy verticals. And when I say sexy verticals, I mean the fashion worlds, the beauty worlds, the ones where a lot of these creative businesses, especially agencies, they want to work, right? How do they activate their community? And take a very obvious example. I don't know, maybe like a Glossier, right? So Glossier would, and they have a fantastic view of how they integrate with the customer that they serve, and they have a level of ambassadorship that sits at a community level. And what that means practically is that they are on a level with their customer. They actually are listening to them, not just speaking down to them. And this could impact everything, Liz, right? So from makeup tutorials to the next product line they bring out, to packaging decisions, to pop-ups that they host, to influencers they invite. They're not trying to kind of rally around the boardroom table internally and come up with the magic that made sense to their community. What they're trying to do is actually understand that they need to bring their community in so they feel part of the journey of where the brand is going. And there's serious value in that, serious value. And what I'm saying is, I think the occupier world, the operator world, the landlord world, they need to beg, borrow, and steal from that type of philosophy. How do we actually bring in the people that we are serving and co-create with them to enable brilliant places that they buy into emotionally, not just from a utilitarian perspective.
Yeah, love that. Love that so much. So you mentioned, and at Juicy, we talked about the join, not buy. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that looks like in practice for a brand or a workspace?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to recap, I guess, because I think it's important to go through those in a little bit more detail before I tell you practically how that comes to life, right? But the phrasing of be a join brand, not a buy brand, is probably from that initial provocation, right? Of the idea that we are setting up some fantastic brands or businesses, should I say, because I think there's a difference between a business and a brand as well, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. Some fantastic businesses which sell brilliant products and services. But in order to really then become a brand that people want to join, there are a few things of a shift of a mindset of how we engage with that customer. So in the presentation, I think the context for the listeners as well is that I did a side-by-side comparison between a buy brand and a join brand and what that actually means in practice. So a buy brand is where consumers buy what the brand sells in a very simplistic context. But a join brand is where consumers buy into what the brands believe. And this is what I'm saying about seeing the brand almost like a person. What does it believe? If it is a person, because it's a bit of a side topic here, and writing a book at the moment. I've got a massive chapter around why brands and places now are the ones that are going to be the bearers of, I'd say, social sentiment for community, for people, because there's a mass loss of trust in big government. There is a dwindling sense of I'd say instability in our everyday. So people are looking to brands to really be the flag bearers of what they believe, what they stand about. And doesn't mean every brand needs to become political, by the way, but it needs to pick a side on a fence around what it stands
stand for
and why
something.
it's exactly.
Yeah.
So a buy brand in that context is in the minds of the consumers, but a join brand is in the lives of the consumer. A buy brand invests into pre-purchase promotion, so the sales message, the thing that gets you to convert. But the join brand invests into post-purchase advocacy. You know, the moment after the product is bought, how are we talking about it, and how are we doing follow-up classes, tutorials, even past the product or service. So I bought a desk or desk membership or an office, and I'm renting. What does that look like as the post-care, the advocacy afterwards that really initiates and buys me into the overall mechanism of what I bought into, not just the desk that I'm actually sitting on. Buy brand is infatuated with sales, and the join brand thinks about rituals, you know, the unique branded moments that a join brand can actually have rather than just focusing on sale. This carries on. So buy brand thinks about sampling and trialing, whereas join brand thinks about learning and community. And I'd say at the very bare bones of it, a buy brand is where consumers transact, whereas a join brand is where transaction is a byproduct of the experience. And so more practically, hopefully you can see how that comes into life. It can span anything from the behavior, from how we understand our cultural capital of our audience, to understand even the things that we put on as a co-working space or brand to speak the language of our customer. So I remember we had a conversation even at the event around one of the operators putting on mental health awareness kind of support, you know, with a kind of psychologist almost. And I think there's something really interesting in that, which is understanding that this is what is poignant with our community. This is what is really sticking out as mental health awareness of more kind of support in that area, to talk, to engage, and to vocalize, knowing that maybe being an entrepreneur is a lonely world, right? And interestingly, the brand understands that and realizes that investment, yes, it might be overhead. Yes, it might be some form of investment from the business, but it does lead to a happier customer, leading into a buy-in into the community for longer term value.
Yeah, well, now you've hit on my soapbox, so give me a minute. One of the things I'm trying to do with Juicy is I always want to help. I want to help co-working proliferate around the world because I do believe it can really make a difference in the loneliness epidemic. So I'm always trying to help existing co-working spaces figure out what's coming next. What do they need to be paying attention to? How can they be better? How can they think about things differently? But at the same time, I'm also putting on my futurist hat and being like, hey guys, what are you doing about sustainability? What are you doing about mental health? And for years and years and years, I've been like, okay, we all know that physical health is good. Nobody needs to prove that to anyone. And we also know that physical health helps mental health. But what I've noticed and drives me absolutely nuts is, I've been on thousands of co-working tours and everybody's like, here's our gym in the basement and nobody's in it, or like one dude's there, right? And I'm like, okay, what if you took the same amount of money that you put into physical health and you put it into mental health? Because you're trying so hard to make your membership sticky and you want people to stay and enjoy and be part of the community. What if there is free therapy? And it's funny because a lot of people are like, what if I subsidize it? Or how am I going to pay for that? And I'm like, look, you know what? I don't care. Figure it out. It's going to be different for different people. But like, I know Cliff Ho of the Commons in Australia, when I told him this, he's like, I'm going to do it. When I told Alex from Foundry, he's like, we'll figure it out. I spoke with Fora. They're like, we're working on it. I spoke to Maslow's and they're like, oh my God, You're right. And so, what I'm really doing this coming year, I'm challenging every single co-working operator to provide free mental health services. And you know what? Just figure it out because it's the right thing to do. Just figure it out.
Yeah. For me, that's a really interesting brief to a certain extent. And I think it probably signifies the amount of work the creative world has to do, because mental health, sustainability, as an example, often can be seen, like social media and community making, can be seen as sometimes, in a cynical context, just a box that they need to tick that they're doing something for it.
Yep.
But interestingly, I think what we need to be doing is projecting the future value of what that looks like. And I'm probably going to absolutely butcher this, by the way, Liz, but there was a fantastic, we have a partner agency called Kevin Haley Studio, run by Kevin, and me and Kevin's chats go into probably a similar length of detail than ours do. And there was a business that was looking, I think, at a kind of a council level, of green space and the impact of green space and the fact that it contributes to a happier, healthier environment of the people who live there, but then as a consequence lends itself to them staying there, lends itself to them being more productive there, lends itself to them being happier there. And the toss-up was, do we get rid of the green space to develop something that could be more commercial, that could be living kind of quarters, etc. But actually the outweighed kind of value proposition of having green space was much more compelling than building on top of it. And only with that level of foresight of understanding what it would lead to is effectively an equation that these co-working businesses need to establish. If we've got a happier, healthier workforce that are working and renting from us and in our building, what does that look like in terms of long-term value and value proposition of where that community then play within our brand? And how do we leverage that to an investor or to someone who is thinking financially to get involved in our business? And I think that's where there's a bit of a gray area, because we're not quantifying the impact that a happier, healthier community member has to our business spreadsheet, because it's not quantifiable.
Yeah. Hey guys, time is running out. Grab Office R&D's biggest offer of the year. Until December 31st, you can get 10% off your first order of Office R&D Flex and a 6-month trial of Growth Hub at no cost. Your toolkit for automating operations, scaling faster, and delivering a better member experience. Learn more and claim the offer at officernd.com/offer. Well, the good news is there are a lot of people working on tracking community. And I think we're getting a lot closer to that through technology that I think is going to be really interesting. So I think that will help. But yes, somehow, we've got to be able to convince the powers that be that this is actually a tool for business, because it makes people happier, it makes them more productive, it makes them want to come to the co-working space more often, and it gives them a safe place to go be heard and seen. And that's something we just desperately need in our society. Your green space example reminded me of one of my favorite, I need to find this somewhere. I know it was on NPR, which is National Public Radio here in America, and they put nature videos in prisons. And then they studied the effect of the nature videos, and they noticed basically violence went down, and people reported that they could then replay that when they were upset or stressed or trying to fall asleep. It had a insanely profound effect on people. And that's the other thing that people don't realize is, yes, plants and green space are really important, but sometimes even just having a picture of a plant can make a difference. It's just wild to me. Nature is so important.
Do you know what? I don't know if you actually, I shared something on LinkedIn the other day that for me, I think is probably going to be the future of where I'm taking the business, to be very transparent, because I think there's absolute value in this. So for context, I guess, because I know you know it, but for the listeners, we work a lot with not only co-working spaces, but landlords. And landlords who own shopping centres, co-working spaces, retail parks, residential developments. And we are infatuated and obsessed by place. And we have these conversations all the time. Often we're in the room with an asset manager or a fund manager. They are dictated by GLA, so gross leasable area, and they're dictated by spreadsheets and numbers and capex investment, and trying to make all of the numbers stack up. But when you then come into a room and you talk about community, you talk about brand, you talk about all of these words that are very part of our vernacular, but definitely not part of theirs, there's almost a light that switches off in their head, where they're not really that interested.
And
there was something
just
that I
glaze
read
over.
Totally. And it's something that I read, and this is basically the shift that I think we need to make. And it was actually a piece of research by Bloom Consulting, of where, and my provocational post was that actually the most valuable asset in property isn't necessarily square footage. For me, it's about perception. And interestingly, this Bloom Consulting piece of research found that perception decides if people want to live, work, visit, or simply avoid a certain place. And it drives demand, it drives desirability, and ultimately, what does that do? It drives value. And the biggest thing that shapes perception is the community. But like I said, landlords see it and property people see it as a nice to have, a cost center, almost a marketing line item. But when in fact, and this is what the research reveals, it's a 24% revenue multiplier, because just a 0.1% improvement in how people perceive a place leads to 17% more tourism revenue, 21% more foreign investment, and 24% higher workforce income. I mean, let's just let that settle in. 0.1% of an improvement in how people perceive a place. And for me, that's not sentiment, that's economics.
Yeah.
And it means that we've got a role with creative thinking, with everything we've just spent the first 15 minutes of this chat talking about, of how we start impacting business value from an asset perspective, from a place perspective, and most importantly, from, in this conversation, a co-working perspective. Because let's be very frank, the co-working brand conversation is very interlinked with the lease that you are agreeing, or the landlord that you are in bed with, or the place that you are taking over. And for me, I think co-working brands underestimate the value that they have in those negotiations because of the type of community and brand that they bring to those assets.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is people glaze over when you start having the community branding, mental health thing with a real estate guy. And then, it's like how, like, that article's great, because that's what we need. We need data that we can give people that shows the value of community. I did a research project in 2015, I know, 10 years ago, oh my God, with Steve King from Emergent Research, and it got published in Harvard Business Review. And we showed that 89% of people in co-working spaces were happier.
Yeah.
They were happier, they were more engaged, they were more productive. And, it's
what was that
just,
down to, Liz? What was that? What did you link that to be because of? Not just because they're in a co-working space, but was there an actual tangible link to why they were happier?
I don't think we came up with an actual tangible link, but it was literally just doing a survey of people in co-working spaces and asking them if they were happier when they're in the co-working space versus at home or at the office. And 89% said, I'm happier here. And like, that's so great. I would love to do a new version of that, but that's a whole nother thing we're not going to get into. Okay, so I want to shift gears for a minute to events, because I love some of the things you talk about on LinkedIn, and you guys should definitely be following Koral on LinkedIn. He posts really great content. I think we've had this big shift post-COVID where, we were so alone for so long, and then it just was weird for a couple years, and now we're back and events are back. And, I think we're seeing big events be back, but also very little events be back. We're seeing like supper clubs have a comeback. I love the quiet, put your phone away and just sit in a coffee shop with other people movement. I love the raves at coffee shops. I love the cold plunging and saunas and all of that. Like, I think I'm excited that people are craving events. And do you think that this is a current trend that'll kind of run its course, or is this the future of work?
I think it fundamentally is the future. And ironically, it's not exactly anything new, as a lot of things that happen in the future is often a recycle around what it comes around to. But I think you're right. I think from a macro shift point of view, we are seeing a more digitally connected, a more lonely, a more depressed society. And we are literally craving human connection. And I talk a lot about, we've optimized everything, right? We've optimized the checkout. We've optimized how we buy. We've optimized our daily lives. But actually, I think there is an optimum amount of friction that we need to add in that people are actively looking for. People are actively paying for pottery classes, which actually they are shit at or they're terrible at, because they know that it's gonna take multiple times to get right. But it's not about the pottery class. It's about being and messing up with that great person that you've met next to you. And I think it's an amazing mechanism of where co-working spaces and the future of work, they can use their physical environment as long as their spaces allow for it, but they can use their physical environment to exercise how people get involved. And I would push it even further. I don't think it's only for the people who rent from us. I don't think it's only for the people that we house. I think it becomes a calling out cry to our local catchment, our area, that can engage with our offer, and they don't necessarily need to just be a customer. They can just get involved because they understand that this is locally, hyper local, it becomes hyper local to the area that they serve. And for me, I think what that means, and if we put our business hat on, it means that suddenly you have a new business engine as a co-working space, of where you are engaging prospect customers, you're engaging prospect people in your funnel that could get involved with your brand. And it's all about how, and I come back to one of those, the original framing that I gave, about how all of these individual verticals within your brand start connecting from your CRM machine, of how you are dicing up your database from new business contacts all the way through to loyal VIP kind of customers who have been with us for 10 plus years, all the way through to people who have come and gone. How are we thinking about individual types of messaging as a brand that is keeping people engaged in our narrative, even if they're not a customer? And I think that's a really important point. But talking about events, yeah, I believe it is the front door to the brand. It is, especially with co-working spaces that have some type of lobby entrance or big kind of communal space that they can host things in. It really does, and to put some stats behind it, it really does drive a lot of value. 85% of consumers are more likely to purchase after attending a branded life experience. 70% become repeat customers, and 87% say these moments are more memorable than any single social media ad or TV ad. So suddenly you have a moment with your audience of where it's about something that you felt, not just about what you see as an advertisement, and that's why I feel like events could be an amazing mechanism for what this becomes. But I'd give you a caveat, Liz, is I think it only makes sense if we are not copying and pasting an event from one location to another, or one brand looking at what one brand is doing and understanding how we repeat what that is because we've seen it be successful. It's got to be intrinsically linked to what the brand stands for, and it's got to be unique in its approach. And I guess that's part of the work that we do, which is understanding the local kind of behavior, sentiment of any single location around the world, and understanding how that brand then really thinks in a hyper localized way to put on something that is unique. And I would go as far as saying, even the co-working spaces that have multiple locations, yes, it might be a centralized brand with a way of talking, a look and feel, but from one location to another, you've got to have a difference because you've got a different audience that you're serving. You've also got a different demographic that are using your actual services. You've also got a different area that you're in. So those events become the behavior that you put on that allow people to interact with your brand and almost kind of have one foot in, should I say.
Yeah, I think and oftentimes that falls on the community manager because they're the one that usually know
Yeah.
the community the best and the events the best. And I think I've seen some of these bigger brands, they really rely on the local community managers to help set that pace. And I think that's the right thing to do. The other thing I've noticed recently, and a lot of the spaces I've gone to, is I have noticed, and I think because some of these spaces were probably designed right post COVID, is that they don't have convertible space. And that's one thing I had when I did my first co-working space is I had this huge space that was 2 stories tall, and that's where we held the events. But all the furniture, the tops could flip and roll. So we could move everything out, and then we had a blank slate to create whatever we needed to create. And like there's a space here in Austin that I visit often that's really fantastic, but they put in like a banquette that you can't move. And like
Yeah.
it's not smart the way the layout is for an event. Like, can it happen? Sure. Do you need to tell everybody that works in the space that, oh, we're having an event, blah, blah? Do they all have to walk through the event to get out the door? Yes, they do. So it's like you need to be thinking about convertible space and making your space available for events.
Yeah, that's why we have such sometimes heated discussions, but sometimes very fruitful discussions with architects, because
Mm-hmm.
they are creatives and they have a fundamental role to play within this, but they get brought in so early in the process to design a space or when they're building a space. But unfortunately, they start with the building. They don't start with people. They don't start with
Yeah.
behavior. And as soon as you start with something that is fixed, especially interior design as well, and what that looks like as people moving around the space, it suddenly there's a mismatch there, because then suddenly you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to retrofit a community within a space that's already designed.
Yeah.
So that's why there's some really interesting work that we do up front with architects. And we'll say, right, let's scrap all of the pens and papers, or now computers and digital kind of designing of what the permanent fixtures and fixings are going to be. Let's understand
Mm-hmm.
what people need from a space first and foremost, and think
Mm-hmm.
about, especially with the lens of events, adaptability. Being able to be programmed. This idea of programming a space means that it needs to change. It can't just
Yeah.
be a fixed kind of asset. So, yeah, it all starts from a design phase, but fundamentally as a strategy. And the thing is, I want to take it to another realm, because I think
Mm-hmm.
everyone thinks about events in a roundabout way. But for me, there's a difference between an event and an activation.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a very small nuance and difference, but an activation feels like it's built for their community that they are serving, and they're thinking about the relevance to their community. An
Mm-hmm.
event feels quite, you know, um, transactional
Programmed.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, programmed. And I think that when we think in the lens of activation and animation of a brand, there's something more exciting of
Mm-hmm.
how deeper it goes, how you program it, the fact that it feels so unique. But yeah, you're right. It all stems also on the space that we are in to do that.
Yeah. So I know you've produced a lot of events, seen a lot of events, been to a lot of events. What's the most recent thing you've seen that's really kind of popped out for you and been like, these guys get it.
Oh God, that you are putting me on the spot there, Liz.
And you don't have to use
Um,
juicy, by the way.
yeah. Well, Juicy obviously is firmly up there. But look, from a more consumer standpoint, um, I think I learn a lot from how some of the big players are doing it. So if I take, I know
Mhm.
I reference Aesop in our chat. I think they have an amazing approach to not only their physical design of their locations, but also how they program some of their key hero locations. Because they don't program every
Mhm.
single store, but what
Yeah.
they do is that they have a design sentiment to the location they're in that feels quite, I'd say, sensitive to the area that it's opening up an ASOS shop. I mean, look, the ASOP is a fantastic example because I think they have an understanding not only from a physical point of view, i.e., architectural point of view, of the location they're entering. They don't just copy and paste the same thing from one place to another, but they program some of their key locations. It all comes with a local sensitivity, which feels really purposeful. And the latest thing is I've just seen their programming list. Not that I'm attending yet because I've still got to register my interest, but I see that they're programming their stores for this upcoming Christmas with a local charity that's involved, with a local choir, and they're doing a sing along with some people who are absolute creatives and I'd say craftsmen of what they do and what they talk about, right? And they are hosting them in the store. And look, one of them is obviously singing, but that could obviously pave its way for a series of other craft people in their own respective verticals. But look at how it's literally singing off the same brand string as what their brand kind of prides itself on, which is craftsmanship, a level of detail, almost a kind of an earthiness and down to earth kind of nature of how it's serving its community. They're not even talking about product in these events and activations. They are using their store in their physical space as the canvas, as the programmable piece of media to then think about how then their product becomes relevant later on down the line as they're recruiting customers.
Yep. We host a lot of dinners with GC, and there's never an agenda. It's just let's share a meal, and it works. It works, and people are like, "Isn't there a pitch?" And we're like, "No, there's no pitch." And they're like, "What?" And we're like, and it works. It works brilliantly. Yeah. So okay, I want to shift gears.
One more, Liz, just because it just made me think. So this is not a public example. This is a private example of a group that I'm part of, and there is a group, and I can't name who's in the group, but there's a group called Good CEOs, and part of the Good CEOs group, there are CEOs and managing directors from some of the leading creative agencies across the UK and Europe, and a recruitment firm decided to put together a monthly get together of these CEOs of these companies, which we have the privilege of being part of. And there is no agenda. There's only one question of what you're struggling with at the moment. And from a business logic point of view, by the way, it costs them 300 quid per month to rent a room. And everyone gets around and and we started to build up some really good connections, right? But interestingly, those are they're not necessarily events, but those moments with his community effectively are not talking about recruitment or finding talent or thinking about business growth. It's actually just a forum that people feel incredibly comfortable in, and they connect from a human to human basis. And that's what's so beautiful about it, is because it feels so genuine, and it feels like, well, actually what he is doing is he's building a community for the community he is serving. Do you see what I mean? So he's almost embodying the logic of the customer that he is serving by then putting them all around the table, understanding their needs and their wants, because he's hosting this conversation, and then he can adapt his business off the back of that, which is really clever.
So clever.
And so I mean, it's one of the things that once a month I look forward to getting involved in, but it's not a public facing thing. All these things don't necessarily have to be advertised and talked about as this sexy community thing. It can be almost a business's secret weapon of how they understand their community that they're serving and do something specifically for them.
Yeah. Love that so much. Oh my gosh, we're almost out of time. So I want to talk about what is lighting you up right now about the future.
What is lighting me up right now? I must admit, what is lighting me up right now is appetite. There is appetite for our way of thinking, which I'm really seeing. And as much as we talk about the things that need to change, and how people need to reframe community and brand, I can see a general consensus that there is an appetite for how to do community building and brand building in a really kind of genuine, authentic way.
Mm.
And that's really encouraging. It gives me a lot of encouragement to carry on doing what we're doing. Every single year, Liz, I mean, for context, I started this business with £1,000 on a laptop, and we haven't received any investment, and we have only grown whenever the business has grown, and we punch above our weight big time. But every single year we are in bigger rooms, talking about bigger projects with bigger brands. And it just proves that great work leads to great work, but great thinking gets you in a room with a level of people that I think, I don't know, you can connect with. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's what's given me a lot of light at the moment. And I also, my second thing is, I think there's masses to get excited about this new generation that's coming up into our workforce, into our everyday. There's obviously a lot of criticism of Gen Z, and there's a lot of kind of, especially from folks like you and me, what and how we used to work and what our working environment used to look like, and understanding what Gen Z are now all about, and maybe how privileged they are. But I think at the same time, there's so much to be optimistic about with them. I think we have such a passionate cohort of people coming through that are going to be coming in a part of our workforce, as part of our consumers, as part of our followers, and also as part of our community. And I think they stand for something. They are going to be absolute champions, I think, of this next wave of brands that we're going to see. That really also fuels me and gets me really excited.
Yeah, I am working on a session for GCUC New York about the future generations and what they're going to want and need from us. And I think it's really shifting. And like that's one of the things, like for years I have been telling, co-working leaders, I'm like, if you're not paying attention to sustainability and mental health and the environment for these folks and wellness, like they're just not going to come to your space. That's it.
Yeah.
They're just not going to come. And so I think it's really important that we understand these generations that are coming towards us, because it's going to shift, and it's going to shift in a really good way in a lot of ways. And our spaces will be more neurodivergent, and they'll be better spaces, and they'll be redesigned, and that's all exciting. Okay, so my next question for you is my little last question killer that's kind of hard but also always good, which is, what question should I have asked you, Koral, but I didn't, that you'd love to talk about?
What
Basically,
question
do my
shouldn't you
job
have
better
asked?
than me.
Oh, I don't know. I guess I always I sometimes like to contextualize why I'm so passionate about this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it would have been nice to start with that, because I think
Mm.
fundamentally, I mean, for context, I guess, and the reason I'm so passionate about this stuff is, I'm a second generation immigrant, and
Mm-hmm.
my granddad moved over from Cyprus, or both my grandparents did actually, from Cyprus into London in the depths of the 50s, into a place
Mm-hmm.
called Bermondsey, which is in South London. It is notoriously or was notoriously rife with racism, with really kind of extreme views. And he operated with uh, minimal money in his pocket, and starting fundamentally on the high street. He opened a multitude of high street restaurants.
Mm.
So he had, well, I said restaurants is even a bit of a stretch. He had a fish and chip shop. He had a kebab shop.
Oh,
And
cool.
my dad was born and brought up on the top of a fish and chip shop, and it
Mm.
gives me so much kind of, you know pleasure, I'd say, to see, where my granddad is at now, but also the fact that a high street community, a community of people, is the thing that elevated his own status, and where that
Mm-hmm.
then took him and allowed him to put his kids into full education, and allowed, us all now 2 generations on to all thrive, go to university. And
Yeah.
fundamentally that started with an understanding of the community. And look, he can speak for days of the story of the next door shopkeeper to the people that used to come in through the door. And it really does kind of emphasize to me that all of this shit, no matter how much we talk about brand and all the fancy things, it comes down to one fundamental thing, which is about connecting with humans. And those little anecdotes and stories, actually, I think we're just going to be in a future of where brands need to just be more human based. And we need to understand and obsess over the people that we are serving. And that's all because of and not that I was around, by the way, when he was doing all this stuff, but anecdotally, I've learned and seen and been a product of what he originally did when he moved over here in the 50s. So, yeah, I guess it's not necessarily a question you should have asked, but I think it's just a case of it contextualizes for me of why I do what I do and why it's so important.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it so much. I love the history. You got to interview him for the book for sure. And,
Yeah.
it is about humans. And I was talking with a group last week and I was like, it just look people in the eye. Just lock eyes with somebody. It's just not done enough anymore. And it's really interesting. I've been running my own little personal experience or experiment where I've been very purposely making eye contact with everybody I interact with, whether it's a cashier or somebody that I'm just walking past in a hallway. It the way you can light somebody up just by giving them a smile and making eye contact, it's so underrated. It is so great. Also, kids in strollers, nobody's looking at them. Smile at a kid in a stroller. It's magic. It is magic.
Yeah.
We're just not seen enough. We're so busy looking at these things that we're missing this vital just moment of recognizing another human.
It's a large part of the work that we do, Liz. We talk about the brand, we talk about how you activate your customer, we talk about the behavior of your customer, but fundamentally that's got to, when you're thinking about the brand and the business owner, it's about how we are training our staff. It's about the people that we choose. You mentioned the community manager. It's about the language they are using, the behavior they are having. Because for me, that's the emotional signal of any space, because they're the ones that are going to be, connecting from human to human. Yeah, much as I don't want to admit it, people don't connect with brands. They connect through people to brands. And that's why that is so important. Because that's why we need to think about the people that we have as part of our organizations, because they are the bearers of how that brand comes to life in someone's world. So yeah,
100%.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more.
Yeah. Well, Koral, I know we could talk for hours, but we're going to give our listeners just this much for now. But hopefully, y'all, I'm working on getting Koral to New York. So more to come on that. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your big, beautiful brain with us, because you are so gifted in your storytelling. And I love somebody that can just spit out stats, because I don't have that ability usually. So bravo. And I'm so happy that Emily introduced us, because I can tell we're going to be friends for a long time.
Thank you so much, Liz. I really appreciate the conversation, and thanks for inviting me onto the podcast.
Thank you again for joining me for such an inspiring conversation about community events and the future of work. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, follow, and share the GC podcast wherever you listen. We're on Spotify, Apple, and all the usual suspects. It helps us reach more people, shaping the co-working movement and the future of how we work. And don't forget, GC New York is coming up. It is going to be in April in New York City. Grab your tickets at na.juicy.co. And until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building communities that matter. Thanks.